Well, greetings to each of you, and welcome to the Shakedown, a podcast about corrections, for corrections, and by corrections. I am your host, Aaron Dawson. Good to be back with you for yet another episode as we continue in our series on sharpening skills. I hope that you have enjoyed and found beneficial those first two episodes, and looking forward to what we're going to discuss this week as well. But in light of what we've been talking about with sharpening skills, want to continue to encourage you to make use of all the resources that NIJO has available. You've got the JailCon conferences, you've got the Elite Academy, you've got the Dakota Online Academy, and then you've got the CMT, the Conflict and Management Techniques course that has been released both for administrators and for line officers. So let me encourage you. Those are some tools that are there that are available for you. Make use of them. But as far as our episode this week is concerned, tickled to death to have as a guest on the show today, Mr. Sean Stewart, formerly a jail commander with Pima County, Arizona. Pardon me. Just shy, I believe, of 30 years that he did there. Started as a line officer, worked his way up through the ranks to the rank of captain. He's an instructor for NIJO and then fulfills a host of other tasks in the field still. If you have been associated with NIJO at all, you're familiar with Sean. If you're been associated with this podcast, we had him on as a guest last season. Always a joy, always an opportunity to talk to Sean. But one of the things I wanted to get in this interview is I wanted to give Sean the opportunity to answer the question. In his mind, what is it that he sees as the most important skills for us as corrections officers to keep sharp? So I'm intrigued to see and to hear what it is that he has to offer on the topic. So without further ado, let's get to that interview. All right. Well, as promised, ladies and gentlemen, we are joined by the illustrious Sean Stewart from the great state of Arizona. Always tickled to have the opportunity to interact with Sean, whether that's in person or via technology. But Sean, good to have you on with us today.
Thank you, Eric.
And as we've been talking about, and this is a conversation that Sean, that you and I have had, oh good grief, dozens of times just on a personal basis. But talking about, the importance of sharpening skills, staying on the cutting edge, if you will, of the career field, and want to focus primarily on the line officers. And I know both you and I share in the fact that when we started in our corrections career, we started as a line officer and then, worked our way up through the ranks. So it wasn't just like we came in at an administrative level, had no understanding of what the boots on the ground look like. We had this distant mentality. No, we worked the blocks, we walked the floors, we dealt nose to nose with the inmates and the little details. And then when we got to the administrative level, apply that knowledge that we had. But as far as your experience as both as a line officer, a mid-level supervisor, and then as an administrator, again, something you and I have talked endlessly about is, often it's not the hard skills that get you in trouble. Yeah, obviously excessive force, those type things, but there's a lot of stuff leading up to the excessive force that creates that environment, that causes that issue, that it's often the soft skills that get us the things that you're probably not going to find in your policy or procedure manual of concepts to build on and to work on and to stay on the cutting edge. So I'm curious, as we jump into this topic of sharpening skills from a line officer perspective, what are some things that you see specifically that line officers need to think about, focus on, and work on as far as sharpening skills?
Well, let me start by saying, first of all, corrections officers, under the best of circumstances, probably have the most difficult job in the criminal justice system, right? These housing unit officers, the ones working day to day with the inmates.
Yeah.
A police officer may have to deal with you for 30 minutes to an hour, 15 minutes, and then drop you off at jail.
Yeah.
Uh, where an officer may have to live with this individual for years,
Yeah.
right? And if you really think about it, I'm not aware of any profession other than the supervision of incarcerated people in which the entities, the clients, the inmates, will engage in actions to undermine staff, intimidate staff, threaten, test, challenge, and sometimes physically harm those who are charged with their care, safety, and security.
Right.
So I believe being that core housing unit officer is probably one of the most difficult jobs that's in society today, if not at least in the criminal justice system.
Yeah.
But it's also the most rewarding. I think I had the most fun as an officer working at a direct supervision housing unit and just getting to play that mental chess game every day,
Yeah.
sharpening my skills, learning things that just weren't taught in the academy, right? My best teachers were wearing orange, um,
Right.
teaching me how to play that mental chess game. What I realized was, and it's hard to get staff to realize this today, when you're working a housing unit or a run, or regardless of the type of supervision your facility use, you have to remember to see inmates as individuals,
Mm.
not as a group of orange, because you're dealing with individuals.
Right.
And I see where a lot of officers get themselves caught up or have issues supervising because they don't see an individual.
Sure.
They just see somebody in orange. If their lips are moving, they're lying, right? That
Right.
type of mentality. No, they're not always lying, and sometimes they're probably telling you the truth. And you got to remember, in a jail setting, you're not dealing with convicted individuals. You may have your neighbor next door in a housing unit this week, and you may have a first degree murderer in that housing unit next week. So you
Right.
have to deal with people on an individual level, just like you would in society.
Right.
And a lot of officers forget that.
Yeah.
You know, I always hear, you ask in depositions and stuff, when I'm reading depositions, they'll ask an officer, what's your job? What's your job function? The officer will say care, custody, and control,
Right.
which it is, right? And we all know that our job is care, custody, and control. But then, like, the plaintiff's attorney will ask the officers, well, describe that for me. What does that mean to you? And then they just freeze, right?
Sure.
To me, it's pretty simple. Care. What does care mean? Care means the officer is responsible for overseeing the inmate for a specific time period and is reasonably responsible for that inmate's health and welfare. And I use the term reasonable
Right.
because we can't guarantee anything. We
Right.
have to do our job, but there's no guarantee, based on the clientele that we're working with. Like I said before, they're constantly trying to undermine us and do things. Not all of them, but a select few that most inmates want the jail to run smoothly. They want to have their day room time. They want a program. They want to make
Yeah.
their phone calls. They want to watch TV. But there's that few, whether they're security threat groups, gang members, some that are just mentally ill, that
Sure.
just want dysfunction. So that's care, right? Custody. The officer, custody, you're in charge of safely supervising an inmate or inmates, and you're reasonably responsible for their well-being. That's custody. They need to see medical. We observe, we report medical diagnosis and treats. But the observe and report has to take place. That's what we need to do. We're in charge of their well-being.
Right.
And then control. To me, that's another simple one. The officer has the authority over the inmate, such as classification, admin seg, placement, movement. And I don't know why, when officers are asked that question in deposition, they can't just answer that question. They they they, they can repeat care, custody, and control, but they just don't seem to be able to articulate. And I've been in depositions. Maybe they get caught off guard and they freeze. But Think about that, because you're going to be asked that question at some point in your career. What does that mean to you, care, custody, and control?
Right.
The other thing I would say um, is don't take things personally,
Mm.
right? When you're supervising inmates or just supervising human beings, don't take things personally. I think that's what we see in politics today is everybody takes everything personal.
Yeah.
I can agree to disagree. I can disagree with you. You can disagree with me. Doesn't mean I hate you or you hate me. We just have a different philosophy,
Sure.
and that's fine, right? Well, the same with the inmates when you're supervising them. Don't nothing is on a personal level. I used to always tell myself I have a job to do, and they have a job to do. The
Right.
majority of them have a job to try and get over on me, get things that they want done, and my job was to prevent that from happening. It's not personal; it's business.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And the other thing that I see that is really hard for officers today, and maybe it's my upbringing. I grew up in South Tucson, a very poor community. I think that allowed me to have empathy
Mm.
for the people I was supervising. Now there's a difference. A lot of people mistake empathy with sympathy.
Right.
I didn't have sympathy because a lot of these guys, they grew up like I did. They did things to get themselves there. So I didn't have sympathy,
Right.
but I could empathize with their situation. In general, sympathy is when you share the feelings
Yeah.
of another. So you have their beliefs and you share those feelings.
Yes.
Empathy is when you understand the feelings of another,
Right.
but do not necessarily share those same feelings.
Yeah.
I can give you an example. I had a Mexican mafia member who had been in ADSEG for a long time,
Okay.
and he was telling me that he wanted to get to general population. What did he need to do? And I used to have a stencil on my wall in ADSEG in big 3-foot letters saying, "Your actions put you here. Your actions will determine how long you stay." And the inmate, he pointed, "Hey, I've been good for a year," and I tell him, "All right, you sign this and admit to me that you're a gang member. Promise me that you're not going to recruit or cause me problems for your organization, and I will let you go to general population. And you have to also acknowledge that if you do something, you will never get out of admin sec." And he signed
Right.
the form. So I put him in general population, and he's doing good for a year and a half. And then I come in on a Monday, and he was involved in an assault on another individual, another gang member. And I call him down to my office, and I'm like, "All right, Mr. So and so, we had a deal here." And he's
Right.
like, Stewart, I tried to warn you. I was talking to my girl on the phone. I sent you a message." And it was like, "Dude, I don't listen to phone calls on the weekend. I'm at home doing other things. You're in
Right.
jail, not me."
Right.
So,
Yes.
and he's saying, "But I tried. I just want you to know I tried." And I remember telling him, "Dude, you gave me your word. You let me down." He gets this solemn face, and he goes, "I know, and I know what's going to happen." He goes, "But let me tell you something, Stuart. I tried to warn you. I get it. It didn't get through. You'll know I tried to warn you when you listen to the call. But if you would have listened to the call and intercepted it, then I would have had an excuse. But I had no excuse. So when I get back to prison, if I didn't do what I was told, they're going to kill me.
Mm.
You can't kill me. All you're going to do is put me back in the hole.
Yeah.
So where is my greater fear?" And I can empathize with that answer.
Sure.
He's right.
Absolutely.
He's right. So it's not personal, but I am going to follow through on my word, and you're going to go to admin seg, and you're not going to come out,
Right.
at least this facility anymore. But
Right.
it wasn't personal, right? I can empathize with the situation he was in.
Yeah.
The other thing I think, but I think it's more of our fault, the way we instruct
Mm.
new officers. If you think about when you were in the academy or at some point throughout your career, we're always being told to respect the inmates, respect, respect, respect. So when I went through the academy, it was respect the inmates, treat the inmates with respect. You have to
Right.
respect them. And then when they got to like officer supervision and stuff like that, they were like, you have to earn the inmates' respect. You have to earn it. And I remember as an officer sitting in the academy going, oh, I just got to outright respect them, but then I have to earn their respect.
Uh-huh.
And I'm a person who believes words have meaning.
That's right.
So I was like, I remember thinking, respect them. So let's look at respect. What does respect mean? The definition of respect is a feeling of deep admiration for someone or something elicited by their abilities, qualities, or achievements.
Right.
Well, I'm not going to respect somebody in an orange uniform because I don't have deep admiration for
Right.
their abilities, qualities, and achievements.
Yeah.
Or to hold someone in high regard or esteem, respect. So that always bothered me. And then I realized we're just using the wrong word. It's not
Yeah.
respect, it's dignity.
That's right.
You have to treat inmates with dignity. In
Yes.
society, you have to treat people with dignity. So I believe, you treat an inmate with dignity until they've proven otherwise. And so what does dignity mean? Dignity means the idea that a being has an innate right to receive ethical treatment. Dignity refers to the manner in which a human being is physically treated or handled. So, I think a lot of times, whether it's psychologically or on purpose, it's not on purpose,
Right.
but we're planting that seed. And then we wonder why they get fished, why an officer gets set up, why these things happen. Uh, so I would like to see people start using the word dignity instead of respect,
Absolutely.
right? Now, an inmate can earn your respect at some point in time,
Sure.
but you don't have to arbitrarily give it.
Yes.
Uh, but you do have to arbitrarily treat people with dignity,
Yes.
right? So, just things along those lines. And then, for an officer, just don't become complacent. I don't know how many times I've seen officers get in trouble because they become complacent. They don't, they've done 100 pat searches a day, and when they get to
Right.
101, all of a sudden they're in a hurry, and it's that quick rub down. Next thing you know, 5 people are overdosing on fentanyl. And then what's going to happen. That this happens, they're going to pull video. They're going to see the quality of your searches. Um, you get so complacent, you start doing drive-by rounds. And what I mean by that is you just walk the perimeter of that housing unit and never really pause to look in the window or even turn
Right.
your head to
Yeah.
look in. Um, those are and the other big thing that I would say to an officer, especially if you're new now, the way you do business today is not going to be the way you do business in 20 years. I
Facts.
started in 1992, and the things that I was allowed to do or I could do in 1992, I can't do today.
Yeah.
And as I've come up through my career, circuit courts come out with new rulings. Uh, the Supreme Court comes out with new rulings. All we got to do is look at use of force and strip searches. Both of
Yeah.
those have changed
Right.
within the last uh, 20 years, at least.
Right.
Your state statutes change. So I think back on the day, and I think I can see faces in my mind of people who got fired and weren't there anymore. And usually it was, what I realized was it was the people who couldn't change when change was necessary
Yeah.
that aren't
Yeah.
there anymore. The
Yeah.
people who can see this law has changed or this statute has changed and they're able
Right.
to adjust how they do business, they can make a career out of this.
Yes.
And it's a really good career. Um, I believe corrections is a career with purpose. You wake up every day, you're doing something for your community. I know that we don't get a lot of the accolades, and that's fine. I,
Sure.
I'd rather be out of the public side, um, and just do my job right, right? If
Yeah.
I can stay out of the news, then I'm doing my job right. I believe an officer has three core duties when he comes to work every day. And if he follows these core duties, he'll always be fine. If you work for a sheriff, one is protect your sheriff
Right.
because he's an elected official and our actions have detrimental or positive effects on that person's career.
Right.
Uh, and then number two is protect your brand because sheriffs can come and go depending on elections. But the brand is always there. Your
Yeah.
department, the name of your department, how the public
Yes.
views your department is there regardless of who the sheriff is. And the officers in the jail and the officers on the street have a direct impact on protecting the brand.
Yes.
And by protecting the brand, you're maintaining the public's trust, right? In all reality, who is our boss? It's not the sheriff. Our boss are the taxpayers, the people who vote for the sheriff. What the sheriff really is the CEO of the People's Sheriff's Department. They just chose
Right.
a CEO. But we work for the people and we have to protect the brand, maintain the public's trust, and just do things the right way. And if you don't know what to do, ask somebody.
That's
There's
right.
somebody in that facility that has an answer for it.
Yeah.
So that's my advice to line officers. Pay attention to what you're doing. Don't become complacent. And just the other thing I've seen, and maybe it's important now than it was in the past, is when you start in a corrections facility, there's going to be a time frame where you don't get it. You
Sure.
haven't learned how to deal with the inmates. You're not comfortable you're not comfortable in your skin. You don't really know what you're doing yet. And I don't care how much training you get at the academy, how much OJT training you get. When you're on OJT, they're acting based on the person who is supervising.
That's right.
As soon as you get off your OJT or CTO program or whatever your organization calls it, that is when they're going to start to see where your hard lines are. And they're going to start pushing you and setting you up. And you don't know what you're doing. The inmates know the policies, procedures, and the inmate rulebook better than you do.
Facts.
So my advice to people is don't give up on yourself too early. Most organizations, there's a long process to get hired, and you actually beat out people for that position. And when you give up on yourself too early, not only did you give up on yourself, but you prevented these other people from having the ability to give this job a chance.
Yeah.
And I say that because when I first started, I think it took me five about 5 months, I
Okay.
think. And when I walked into that place for the first 5 months, after I'm off all the training, it was a dark place and it was weighing me down. Luckily, it was in the 90s and there were no other jobs available. So I had to suck it up, buttercup, and get through this.
Right.
But at about the 5th month mark, it's almost like an epiphany. My eyes opened. I understood what I was doing. I was comfortable in my skin. I understood that the inmates were going to play me and they were going to push me. I had to draw my lines in the sand. I had to stand firm. If I didn't, that line was constantly going to move. Uh, Nothing's personal. These guys are doing what they're going to do, and I have to do my job
Right.
within the law, policies, and procedures, and just get it done. And then the job became so easy. In all reality, yes, if you really think about it, I used to tell people I don't get paid for what I do on a daily basis. I get paid for that bad day. And usually in corrections, when we have a bad day, it's a really bad day.
Right.
But it's not every day.
Right.
And if I look over my career of just about 30 years, I may have had 100 bad days out of 30 years.
Yeah.
That's a damn good profession to only have
Yes.
had, like I
Yes.
said, but when they're bad, they're bad. But don't give up on yourself too early. Now, I would say if you're 6 months to a year in and you're still miserable, then you should probably find another job because it's
Sure.
not going to get any easier for you.
Yeah.
People become addicted to the paycheck in certain areas of the country, right? Um, and you don't want to give up that pay. But if you're not living a good life, if you're not happy, if you're taking it out on your family,
Right.
then the job's not for you. But don't give up too early, because you will become comfortable in your skin.
Yeah.
And then the job becomes really easy. It's not personal. And every day you wake up, it's fun to go to work. And you have a job with purpose that this community needs, that your community needs. It might not tell you that all the time, but what's that old adage? You can sleep well at night because we keep your monsters locked up.
Yeah.
And that's a fact. And we have to do it the right way.
Yes.
That's my advice to a line officer.
Well, that is, and I'll tell you, I got a kick out of it talking to, it was an older, I say older, when I started in corrections, and a guy that had been in the field for a while. I'll be honest with you, I don't know what his age was, but he was a veteran, put it that way. And he told me, he said, this job, he said, like you said, you'll have the days that are awesome. You have the days that are miserable. He said, but there's not a day that you come into this building where you don't have to worry about it not being interesting. And I thought that is a fantastic word. Interesting is a good word.
And you just made me think of something else. And don't try and change your personality, because it's not going to happen. I believe a lot of people try and change their personality, and that's what causes a lot of the mental strife with them.
Sure.
I believe, I was a competitive person, but I was also happy-go-lucky. So I like to use my sense of humor.
Right.
The other thing is you have to be consistent.
Yeah.
So if you're going to use your sense of humor and be funny, and then an inmate, does something to you and it's funny, you can't get upset. If you're having a bad day at home, you can't come in and take it out on the inmates. If you have a bad day at work, don't take, the old adage, you take your uniform off at work and you leave everything that's associated with it there until you put it on again in the morning.
Right.
I'll give you an example. So, however often your agency rotates or whatever, we would rotate about every 4 months. So like 3 times a year. And I always hated a rotation, because usually the first week to 14 days was going to be a constant battle every day, because they want to see where you're going to go and you want to see where they're going to go.
Yep.
So I used to when I took over a pod, I would let everybody out in the day room and have them sit in a chair. And I would give them my expectations like I would staff. And I would say, look, the rule book says you can't take food to your room. Officer Stewart doesn't care if you take food to your room. I'm not going to ding you on it, but you have to eat it before I do my room checks.
Yeah.
I get it. You want to go make something with your Marukian noodles, throw something in. Okay. But it has to be eaten before I do my room checks.
Yeah.
I don't care if you cuss at me. Doesn't bother me. So I'm not going to write you up if you use profanity. So don't write a grievance on me if I do. We all good? Yeah. And I would just have that speech, and I just let them know where I'm at. And I would tell them, look, I'm going to enforce the rules. I don't want to hear what Officer Smith does on I was on swings most of the time. I don't want to hear what Officer Smith does in swings. I don't want to care what Officer Jones does on midnights. I'm here at that time for these 8 hours. It's my house for 8 hours. You're just guests in my house.
Right.
And I would get done, and every time, somebody would come up to me at some point and go, "Hey, Stuart, we really run this, and yeah, as long as you don't cause us problems, we won't cause you problems." I'm sure anybody who's been in this job for any amount of time has heard this speech from an inmate.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, Jesus, we're good, man. I get it. And then I would have a lunch break about 5:30, 17:30. So I'd go on my lunch break. And then I'd come back early and I'd turn my radio up as loud as it would go. And I'd sit at the desk. And all of a sudden, Central Control would come online and say 1800's lockdowns lifted, let your inmates out for day room. And I would sit there. And you could start to see faces come to the windows. And finally, one would knock on, say, "Hey, Stuart, you're going to let us out?" I'd be like, "No, Juan says he runs the pod. Tell him to let you out." And then after about 15 minutes, I'd let everybody out, and one would come up and say, "Hey, that's messed up, man. You told me you run the place.
Right. Yeah.
I run it. I run it for 8 hours. I don't know what you do when I'm not here, but I run it for 8 hours." And then another trick I used to always do when an inmate would always try and play one officer against another. So they would come in and say, "Hey, Jones was Jones was talking bad about you on day shift, and he says you do this and you do that." I'm like, "Oh, really? Okay, all right." So Jones, the next day when I come in to relieve Jones, I go up to that door, I pop that inmate's door, and I say, "Hey, Smith, now tell me what CO Jones was saying about me." "Oh, you just confront him.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
don't fall into those traps.
Yeah.
Again, play that mental chess game and just be smarter than they are, and
Yeah.
and and confront them when you have to confront them, and
Awesome.
your job will be easy, easy.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, awesome advice. And I'll tell you, given the time we've got to be done for this episode. But for those of you who have enjoyed thus far, we're going to do another one right behind this one. We're going to talk to those in supervision. But definitely appreciate Sean Stewart being here with us. And like I said, we're going to jump into another interview here just a little bit to talk about supervision. But Sean, I appreciate your the time and the opportunity to chat with you. And guys, as always, it's up to you. You can take what we discuss. You can take the things that are put forward. You can apply them. They can be beneficial to you. You can ignore them. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, you'll find out later that you probably should have applied them. But take this, use it the way the best you can. And guys, as always, until the next time, stay sharp, stay safe, stay vigilant. Godspeed.